You know, there are moments in politics when something happens that catches everyone off guard, moments that remind you that our democracy, as messy and frustrating as it can be, still has the capacity to surprise us. What happened on the House floor recently was exactly one of those moments. 13 Republicans, 13 men and women who could have taken the easy path, who could have stayed quiet and gone along with their party leadership, instead chose to stand up for something bigger than politics. They chose to stand with Democrats to block an executive order that would have fundamentally changed how our government works. Now, before we dive into what this means and why it has the White House scrambling, I want to ask you to do something. If you believe that our democracy works best when people are willing to put principle over party, when folks are willing to have tough conversations about the direction of our country, then please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us keep having these important conversations. And if you can take that extra step to become a member, it makes all the difference in our ability to bring you these stories. Let me tell you what really happened here, because this wasn't just any ordinary vote. The administration had put forward what they called Schedule F, an executive order that sounds technical and maybe a little boring, but was actually one of the most significant attacks on our civil service system in decades. This order was designed to strip away the job protections that federal workers have relied on for generations, protections that keep them safe from being fired simply because they disagree with a political appointee or refuse to break the law. Think about what that means for a moment. We're talking about the scientists who make sure your drinking water is safe, the inspectors who ensure your food won't make you sick, the analysts who track threats to our national security, the folks who process veterans' benefits. These aren't political operatives, they're public servants who took an oath to serve the American people, not any particular president or party. And this executive order would have made every single one of them vulnerable to being fired, not because they did a bad job, but because they wouldn't pledge personal loyalty to whoever happens to be sitting in the Oval Office. The White House thought this was going to be easy. They counted the votes. They assumed party discipline would hold like it usually does, and they figured they could push this through without much resistance. But they forgot something important. They forgot that behind every government worker is a family, a community, neighbors who know these folks aren't some faceless bureaucracy, but real people doing important work. And when you threaten to take away their voice, their job security, their ability to speak truth to power, you're not just attacking a system, you're attacking the very idea that competence should matter more than politics. That's exactly why those 13 Republicans broke ranks. They heard from their constituents, from families in their districts who were scared about what this could mean for their livelihoods. They looked at this executive order and they didn't see government reform. They saw a power grab that would give the executive branch dangerous control over people whose job it is to serve the public, not serve a politician. What we witnessed wasn't just a vote, it was a firewall against the kind of unchecked power that our founders specifically designed our system to prevent. These representatives understood that when you start firing people for doing their jobs honestly, when you demand loyalty tests for scientists and analysts and inspectors, you're not draining any swamp, you're filling the government with people who will tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to know. Now, the reaction from the administration has been swift and it's been angry. They feel betrayed. They're talking about retaliation. They're using words like traitors to describe elected officials who voted their conscience. But here's what I see when I look at those 13 Republicans. I don't see betrayal, I see courage. I see people who remembered that their first loyalty isn't to a party or a president, it's to the Constitution and to the people they represent. This executive order was about more than just employment rules. It was about whether we're going to have a government of experts or a government of loyalists. It was about whether facts matter more than politics, whether experience counts for something, whether the people who keep our country running should be able to do their jobs without fear of political retribution. Those 13 Republicans looked at that choice and they chose competence over loyalty, principle over party. But let's be clear about something else. This fight is far from over. The administration isn't going to just accept this defeat and move on. They're already looking for other ways to accomplish what this executive order was supposed to do. They're going to try different approaches. they're going to look for workarounds, and they're going to keep pushing because consolidating power over the federal workforce has always been central to their vision of how government should work. The question we need to ask ourselves is why this administration sees independent thinking as such a threat. Why is it that when a scientist points to data that contradicts what they want to hear, when an analyst presents facts that complicate their narrative, when a career professional says, hold on, that might not be legal, the response isn't to engage with those concerns, but to try to eliminate the people raising them entirely? You see, what this executive order was really about wasn't making government more efficient or more responsive. If that were the goal, they would have worked with Congress, they would have held hearings, they would have brought in experts to discuss the best ways to improve how our federal agencies operate, but they didn't want a conversation. They wanted control. They wanted the power to shape the federal workforce in their own image, to ensure that everyone working in government would think twice before challenging a directive from above. This takes us back to a time in our history that we moved past for very good reasons. Before we had civil service protections, before we established the principle that government jobs should go to qualified people rather than political cronies, every time a new administration came to power, they would fire everyone and replace them with their supporters. It was called the spoils system, and it was corrupt, it was inefficient, and it hurt the American people because competence took a backseat to political loyalty. We got rid of that system because we learned something important about how democracy works. We learned that the government belongs to all of us, not just to whoever wins the latest election. We learned that expertise matters, that continuity matters, that having people in important positions who know what they're doing is more valuable than having people who just know how to say yes to the boss. When I was president, sure, there were times when the bureaucracy moved slower than I wanted it to. There were times when career professionals pushed back on ideas I thought were important. But you know what I learned? More often than not, they were right to push back. They had knowledge I didn't have. They understood consequences I hadn't considered. They were thinking about problems from angles I hadn't explored. That's not obstruction, that's good government. The current administration seems to view any pushback, any questioning, any request for more information as disloyalty. They've created this narrative about a deep state that's working against them, but let's be honest about who they're actually talking about. They're talking about the epidemiologists at the Centers for Disease Control who track disease outbreaks. They're talking about the economists at the Treasury who analyze the impact of tax policy. They're talking about the engineers at the Department of Transportation who make sure our bridges don't fall down. These aren't political operatives plotting in some shadowy conspiracy. These are your neighbors, folks who went to school to study public health or economics or engineering because they wanted to use their skills to serve their country. When the administration attacks these people as enemies of the state, they're not exposing some hidden conspiracy. They're attacking the very idea that knowledge and experience should inform how we govern. Now, let's talk about the people who stood up to this. Those 13 Republicans who crossed party lines didn't do it on a whim. They looked at their districts, they talked to their constituents, they thought about what kind of government they wanted to leave to their children. Many of them come from competitive districts where voters want pragmatic solutions, not ideological purity tests. They understood that their job isn't just to rubber stamp whatever comes from the White House, it's to exercise independent judgment on behalf of the people who elected them. And let's give credit where credit is due to the Democratic leadership in the House. They could have turned this into a partisan food fight. They could have used it as an opportunity to score political points, but instead they focused on the substance. They built the coalition that was necessary to stop this executive order, and they did it by appealing to shared values about how government should work rather than by attacking the other side. The labor leaders who sounded the alarm about this executive order also deserve recognition. They understood immediately what this would mean for working families across the country. They didn't just see this as an attack on federal workers. They saw it as part of a broader assault on the idea that workers should have rights and protections. They mobilized their members, they educated the public, and they made it clear that this fight was about more than just government employees. But here's what really strikes me about this moment. In a political environment where we're constantly told that everything is hopelessly polarized, where we're told that Republicans and Democrats can't agree on anything. 13 Republicans looked at this issue and decided that protecting workers' rights was more important than party loyalty. They decided that preserving the integrity of our civil service was worth risking the anger of their own leadership. That tells us something important about the state of our democracy. Yes, we're divided on many issues, but there are still some principles that transcend party lines. The idea that competence should matter more than politics, the idea that public servants should be able to do their jobs without fear of retaliation, the idea that our government should serve the people rather than the personal interests of whoever happens to be in power. These aren't Republican or Democratic ideas, they're American ideas. And that brings us to the bigger question we all need to be asking ourselves. What kind of country do we want to be? Do we want to be a nation where public service is respected and protected? Or do we want to be a place where serving your country means constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if the next tweet or the next election is going to cost you your job? The administration's reaction to this vote has been telling, instead of accepting that maybe, just maybe, there were legitimate concerns about this executive order. Instead of taking a step back and asking whether there might be better ways to achieve their goals, they've doubled down on anger and threats of retaliation. They're already talking about primary challenges for those 13 Republicans. They're looking for other ways to punish federal workers, and they're making it clear that, in their view, crossing them on any issue is an act of betrayal. But here's what they don't understand. This isn't about betrayal, it's about accountability. In a democracy, elected officials don't owe their loyalty to a party leader or even to a president. They owe their loyalty to the Constitution and to the people they represent. When those 13 Republicans voted against this executive order, they weren't betraying anyone, they were fulfilling their oath of office. The truth is, what happened in that chamber was a reminder of something we sometimes forget in the heat of political battles. Our system of government was designed with checks and balances precisely because the founders understood that power corrupts and that even well-intentioned leaders can make mistakes when they're not held accountable by other branches of government. This executive order was an attempt to bypass those checks and balances. It was an attempt to concentrate power in the executive branch in a way that would have fundamentally altered the relationship between political leadership and career civil servants. If it had gone through, it would have sent a message to everyone working in government that their job security depended not on their competence or their dedication to public service, but on their willingness to go along with whatever the political leadership wanted, regardless of whether it was legal, effective, or in the best interests of the American people. Now, I want to be clear about something. The fight over civil service protections isn't really about protecting bureaucracy for its own sake. It's about protecting democracy itself. When you have a government where people are afraid to speak truth to power, where experts are silenced or fired for providing inconvenient facts, where loyalty tests matter more than qualifications, you don't have a government that serves the people. You have a government that serves whoever happens to be in charge at the moment. We've seen what happens in countries where that kind of system takes hold. We've seen how quickly institutions can be corrupted when political loyalty becomes more important than professional competence. We've seen how democracy can erode not through some dramatic coup, but through the slow, steady elimination of the guardrails that keep power in check. That's why this vote mattered so much, and that's why we can't afford to treat it as just another political story that will fade from the news in a few days. This was a test of whether our democratic institutions are strong enough to resist authoritarian impulses, and the good news is that on this day, they were. But we can't take that for granted. Democracy isn't self-sustaining. It requires constant vigilance, constant engagement, constant willingness by ordinary citizens to pay attention and speak up when they see something going wrong. The administration is already regrouping, already looking for other ways to achieve what this executive order was supposed to accomplish. They're not going to give up on their vision of total control just because they lost one vote. That means this moment, as important as it was, is just the beginning. We need to stay engaged. We need to keep pressure on our elected officials to stand up for democratic values. And we need to make it clear that we're watching, we're paying attention, and we won't accept the slow erosion of the institutions that protect our freedoms. I've always believed that change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down. The reason those 13 Republicans felt empowered to vote their conscience was because they knew that people back home were watching, that their constituents cared about this issue, that there would be consequences for making the wrong choice. That's how democracy is supposed to work. That's how we hold our leaders accountable. So here's what I need from you. Don't let this story disappear from your radar. Keep talking about it with your friends and family. Keep asking your representatives where they stand on protecting civil service. Keep demanding that competence and integrity matter more than political loyalty. And most importantly, keep believing that change is possible, because moments like this prove that it is. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that we need more coverage of the real stakes behind these political battles, then I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, share this video with people who need to hear this message, and if you can take that extra step to become a member of our community, it makes all the difference in our ability to keep bringing you these important stories. Leave me a comment below. Do you think those 13 Republicans did the right thing? What do you think this means for the future of our democracy? Let's start a conversation, because that's how we move forward. That's how we build the kind of country we want to leave to our children. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And let's keep fighting for the democracy we believe in.